Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to my conversation with Allison Lee. Allison is a mom joyfully transformed by the experience of raising children and learning from them. An attorney by training, she left the practice of law to teach courses in law and ethics to all kinds of students. Having survived domestic violence as a child and a mass shooting, she strives to help others heal from trauma by sharing her own experience of physical and emotional recovery. Additionally, Allison is the guardian for two disabled parents as they move through the sunset of their lives. She lives simply in a small house in Tucson, Arizona with her family. She loves gardening, cooking, reading, walking, and nourishing her friendships. And I get to be the fortunate recipient of some of that nourishment. She volunteers helping teens in her community, and she describes herself as a proud Luddite who uses a flip phone and survives and even thrives despite zero social media. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you my dear friend, Allison Lee. Thank you so much, Allison, for agreeing to chat with us.
Of course.
Yeah, I really wanted you on here because, even though you haven't had a complex chronic mystery medical illness, you have had some trauma, both physical and emotional, and you have such a beautiful way of articulating your process. And I've been able to hear from you over the years as you've moved through a lot of those things. And I would just be so fortunate if you would be willing to share some of your learnings with this audience. So thank you for being on here.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So before we get into what lessons you might have for a person who has a complex, baffling issue that they're dealing with, will you tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you to kind of where you are in life right now?
Well, I grew up in rural East Tennessee near the mountains, and I had lots of extended family all around me. But my parents divorced, and my mom, single mom, went back to school and worked full time and rented out part of our house. And unfortunately, she had a boyfriend who was abusive to her. So my brothers and I, for years, witnessed that abuse, which obviously is very traumatic. And at the time, kids just, whatever's happening, kids think is just normal. I think that's what people do. And it was only until sort of years later, looking back, when I was struggling with depression, that I was able to a light bulb went off in my early 20s when I realized, I think this is depression, and I think it's connected to witnessing, severe physical violence against my mom, who was my primary caregiver. And at that time, it was in the 70s when the abuse was happening. People didn't talk about it. There was so much shame, and no one had the vocabulary. And, occasionally you call the police, and the police ask the abuser what's going on, and mom's hysterical, and it just perpetuates. So, and that is a very despairing message, for a child, that here is, I think about how in times of war, when a war is happening, I guess who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, and it's happening outside your home. But abuse that happens in the home, when the front door is open to the abuser, it's terrible, and it's terrifying, and it makes it hard to sleep at night. It's like the perfect recipe for depression and anxiety. So in my 20s, I finally understood. I think when I was in college, maybe sophomore year in college, I had an experience where I walked in a room and I saw my friend with her boyfriend, and he was choking her. And it was like the lights, the lights came on, and I just kind of screamed, and I was like, oh, I understand this. I understand what's happening. This won't end unless you stand up to it, get out, kind of just threw a big scene. I threw a big scene, and I won't go into that story with my friend. She did get away from him and move on. But that was a huge epiphany. And so over the years, I've had periods of depression, and I've learned from them. Like depression, I think, is, the way I see it, is kind of like a rut in the road, and your mind and your body can slide into that rut. And sometimes it can feel familiar in that rut, and you can stay in that. I think of it as like a road that is this is how I vision it. In the middle of the road is a grassy stripe, and on the sides are these sort of ruts that are the sunken part of the road that's easy to go into. And it takes a certain consciousness to stay up on top of the grassy high point of the road. Sometimes no matter what you do, you'll go into the rut. But as long as you have a system, and I'll use the word system for lack of a better word, a system, a structure to help you remember and help you with the skills for navigating back out of the rut, that's what you need. And that system needs, in my experience, it needs to be in place before you go into depression or before the hard times happen. So one thing we can talk about is how to build that system.
Yeah.
Yeah. So over the years, I guess I've had maybe 3 or 4 sort of periods of depression. The first time, 2, 3, and then another challenge is that in my family, I have 2 brothers, and both of my brothers and I have all struggled with mental health challenges. And my father is probably bipolar as well. So there's this history of mental illness, maybe genetically transmitted, not helped by a childhood environment of abuse. So all of these challenges, these are huge challenges, and you have to I've experienced them, I've learned from them. It's very hard to learn when you're down in it. But if you have a system, a structure, people around you, and you have a way of talking about it and learning about it, resources, it's possible to, move yourself out of it and try to stay out of it as best you can. Of course, life throws things out of our control at us. And so, we have to respond. But I think learning about it as best you can, of course, the learning may be intellectual, and you can be in a hard time, you can be in a depression, and no amount of intellectual anything can get you out of it. Like, the intellectual structure helps, but anyone who's ever been in depression, you can hear it, you can understand someone saying something to you intellectually, but you have to, it's actually sort of mysterious. You have to emotionally, it's so hard to talk. It's so hard to describe it and name it. People who've been there, I'm sure, know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I'm also hearing in what you're saying that it's not, mental illness may be mental illness, but thinking yourself out of it isn't necessarily the answer. Right. And it reminds me of this quote that I love that I saw on Facebook a few years ago, talking about some social workers who'd gone over to Rwanda after the genocide. Kind of this charity mission went over there, and they had a bunch of social workers and therapists and talk therapists who were, bringing the community into buildings and sitting with them and talking about their feelings. And then one of the people said, we had these lovely people come from the West to help us with our sadness, and they made us sit in dark rooms alone by ourselves and talk about our feelings. They didn't tell us to dance. They didn't have us singing. They didn't take us outside where we could be connected to our community and the earth. We had to ask them to go. So it's almost like there's an embodiment there that's like a pathway out as opposed to more of the same, you know?
Yes. Yes.
If that's what you're getting at.
Yes. I'm reminded suddenly of a first of all, I love that. And I think singing and dancing and being outdoors is super important medicine. And all of us should be doing it, as often as we can. And that's part of what I call the support structure or the system to prevent falling into depression and to prevent anxiety and to just avoid injury and illness in the first place as best we can.
Beautiful. And I want to get there in a minute. But first, I'm curious because you said, you have to have this system in place before sort of life hits you. It obviously wasn't in place when you're a child. Like you haven't had time to kind of create a pathway to resiliency before bad stuff happens. But you had some other traumatic things happen later in life. And I'm wondering if you'll talk about those and also tell us about where you were with your practice of self-care prior to that and how that looked different.
Okay. So let's see, I'm trying to think if I think I'll talk first about an experience I had with postpartum depression, and then I'll talk about the experience I had surviving a mass shooting. And crazily, strangely, surprisingly enough, I would say the postpartum depression was harder than the mass shooting part. So postpartum depression happened when my first child was born. I was busy working as a lawyer. I was working full time. My job was very stressful, but at that point in my life, I was early 30s, and I had this idea that stressful was cool.
You're kind of, in many ways, it's part of the American culture, right? Even though
that's right. The drama of the trials, the challenges, and all of that, I bought into that. And while I was learning intellectually from those challenges and seeing all of these people with their struggles, and I felt proud that I was trying to help, as I was a public defender attorney, so a free lawyer appointed by the court to help people accused of crimes. Super demanding. I mean, you have to do trials, lots and lots of trials, lots of cases. And sometimes people are speaking Spanish. Sometimes clients are speaking Spanish. And my Spanish was not good enough for that, but it was such a desperate need that I would step in. Plenty of mentally ill clients, some of them unlawfully present in the United States. So there's an element of immigration law. Super challenging and super stressful. I don't think I acknowledged how stressful until I became pregnant, had the first trimester migraines regularly, and would find myself, vomiting, diarrhea, and trying to work. So when my baby was born, my first daughter, Fiona, she was, it was a great birth, kind of a textbook, relatively easy. Of course, now I can say it's easy looking back at the time. It was, as we know, childbirth is very painful. It's terrifying. You think you're dying, all these things. But looking back, it was, a straightforward birth, no major complications at all. But for some reason, like on day 3 after she was born, I became obsessed with it, just overwhelmed with anxiety, just worried for her. And my doctor, or our family doctor, said, she's growing, she's healthy, she's fine. She was a skinny baby, but people want to see a chubbier baby. But, people would say, oh, is your baby premature? No, she was late, and it was hard. She was slow growing, but she grew long fast, but she was just skinny. And she cried a lot, and I was anxious. And so I walked into work. So I did maternity leave 3 months, and then I walked into work on the day I was supposed to go back, and just quit, sobbing and quit. And my boss said, wow, maybe you should go home, come back on Monday, consider coming back halftime. We'd love to have you. We want you. Don't quit, please. So I did come back halftime, but I struggled for a solid year with postpartum depression, and I diagnosed myself. I saw the poster in the bathroom somewhere about this, and I contacted here in Tucson, University of Arizona, I contacted a postpartum depression study that a psychiatrist was doing. I jumped in there. I joined a support group. I read a lot about depression, but just interrupted sleep, trying to breastfeed, trying to do this stressful job. Looking back, I was so overwhelmed and so depressed. And I thought I was a terrible mom. And I thought it's excruciating. People who've been there know these symptoms are all textbook. In fact, the psychiatrist told me I had a classic case of postpartum depression. So just,
A plus on that.
A plus, that's right. So I just remember at some point when my baby started sleeping through the night more, started to get more sleep. And I think my body just crossed a threshold of some thing in my body was getting enough sleep. And I very clearly remember pushing the stroller down the neighborhood street, and I heard a bird singing in the tree. This is Tucson, okay? And, it's sunny all the time. And I heard a bird singing, and I stopped and I said, "What is that bird? What's that unusual bird?" And I looked at the bird, and it was a hummingbird. They're everywhere here. And I realized that's just a regular hummingbird. I haven't seen, it's been there. I just haven't heard it or seen it in a very long time. And I looked around and I thought, God, it's a beautiful day. And I was like, I think this is just a regular day. I'm just noticing it. And I came home and I kind of had this feeling of coming out of a fog. And it wasn't just straight up. It was, like bigger breaths, a pattern of taking larger breaths over time. I started to realize I have got to sleep. I have no family helping in town. My husband was working and going to grad school, and it's hard for all new parents. It's hard for new moms. It's hard when you're in a stressful job. And I had done tons of babysitting. I thought I knew all about babies, but it's just such a massive responsibility. It's so overwhelming. Many people feel some version of this, some more than others. And we don't talk about it, or we don't, there's shame and disappointment around it. So that was just kind of a long, drawn out challenge. And I think that, one of the things that I learned through the support group and through the study I participated in is just, the childhood domestic abuse I witnessed is a big factor. And the previous depressions I had, that's what I mean about just sliding into that rut. I just think lack of sleep, the huge responsibility of a new baby, it just sort of tapped me into the rut. And the rut became...
It just pulled you into that familiar place.
That familiar bad space. So when my second baby was born, I was so prepared. I actually quit working and I just said, instead of a 3-month maternity leave with the clock ticking, I'm just walk away from the practice of law. And about that time, my husband basically lost his job. He didn't lose his job. He lost his boss died, and he lost the funding for his work. So he wasn't told, "You're fired." It was just, I guess you can keep working. There's just no money. So same result. So suddenly we went from two full-time incomes to 1.5, because I went half-time when the first child was born, and then 1 income, and then temporarily no income. He went out and got another full-time job, and then he went to school, back to school half-time. So with the second baby, it was kind of a setup for big challenges, right? And we were both worried about postpartum depression coming back. And when the second baby was born, it was an easy textbook birth, but I hemorrhaged and then was put on bed rest. So a real setup for more depression. But I think because, in a way, I think because I was so ready to be imperfect, I had told everyone I might have postpartum depression. So that's why my sleep matters. That's why I'm reaching out to all my friends. That's why I'm in this support group, even though I'm not diagnosed with depression yet. And I had a much better social structure by the time the second baby came, which I want to talk about in a minute, is the social structure.
I definitely want to get into that because I think it's so key. And I also just want to rephrase what I said earlier. I said you'd never had a complex, chronic, mysterious medical illness. But if you take out the mysterious part, you had all the rest. You know, like there was a label that matched what you had, but everything you're saying in terms of, you know, the isolation and the tunnel vision, you know, the sort of like, you know, no more hummingbirds, even though they're still there, like just super focused on the internal world of that suffering is so relevant to anyone who's experiencing a debilitating illness. So I really appreciate just how deeply you're sharing around that. So please continue.
Yeah, I'm happy to share about it because that's how I learned, was reading and talking to people about this and hearing their stories. And it's so, you know, I think depression is sort of it is mysterious. It's when you're in it, when you're in it, you may or may not know you're in it. When you're not in it, you know you're not in it. Like, I know I'm not in it now. It's from the point of view of the individual person, in many ways, it's very mysterious. And it's actually it's very common. You know, it's really, we're all on a spectrum. We all move in and out of light and darkness throughout life. And sometimes events outside our control just turn off the lights, you know. Sometimes though, and this is the mysterious part, you can be in the light and somehow you're turning off the lights and you don't even know why you're doing it. So that's the part about the chronic, ordinary, mysterious illness of depression.
Yeah.
So after my second child was born, and I did not have postpartum depression. Yeah, I was tired. Yeah, I was challenged. Yeah, I was scared sometimes. But basically, second time around, I don't know. I felt like I was just, I felt like I had built consciously and carefully, brick by brick, built up something. Like you used the word resilience. I don't know, a prophylactic prescription, a system, a structure. So, and, you know, I'm talking about all the things that I did, but it's also really important the things that other people do to help us. And asking for help, people, you know, just the gift, the luck, the good fortune of having people around you who listen, who care, and who are willing to learn about these scary things, you know. So when my first child, when Fiona started preschool, she went to preschool at this little parent-owned cooperative walking distance from my house called Tucson Community School. And on the wall of the room was a poster, and it said in the poster, how to build community. And it was a list of things to do. So I think that this might have been back in the day. I think this might have been before we bought things left and right online. But anyway, I wrote and got a copy of this poster, and it's now laminated, and it's right over there on my wall. How to build community. Turn off your TV, leave your house, know your neighbors, look up when you're walking, greet people, sit on your stoop, plant flowers, use your library, play together, buy from local merchants, share what you have, take children to the park, garden together, support neighborhood schools, fix it, even if you didn't break it, have potlucks, honor elders, pick up litter, read stories out loud, dance in the street, talk to your mail carrier, listen to the birds, put up a swing, help carry something heavy, start a tradition, ask a question, hire young people for odd jobs, bake extra and share, ask for help when you need it, open your windows, sing together, turn up the music, turn down the music, listen before you react to anger, seek to understand, learn from new and uncomfortable angles.
And that was hanging in your child's school hallway.
Yes.
Love it.
There I was cruising along with, and, you know, of course, for financial reasons, I went back and started working part-time. But basically just after my second child's birth, I did do some work to earn money, and I didn't stop working completely, but the kind of level of household income was reduced, and we had to buy less. And that's great, actually, because when you do that, you slow down and move slowly and reuse things and go for hikes instead of buying stuff you don't need. And, you know, raising our daughters camping for vacations, and, you know, and not with all the expensive camping gear either, just throwing stuff in the back of the station wagon. And, you know, so all of the budgeting and the, you know, not, we had enough, you know, we had enough money to do what we needed, but the budget of me not working that much just forced a big slowdown, and, you know, potlucks instead of restaurants and all that. So then when my older daughter was about to start first grade and my younger daughter was in preschool, we were visiting my family in Tennessee, and it was a Sunday morning. And in Tennessee, in East Tennessee anyway, pretty much everyone goes to church on Sunday. And so we decided to be visitors at a church where they had advertised in the paper for a children's music performance. And we all like to sing. And so we thought, let's go see this. It was a summer day in June. So June 2000. You know, it's very interesting that I can't remember this date exactly. That's kind of how kind of far back it is.
Yeah.
So it must have been 2008. Yes, it was June 2008, the year of the financial crisis, which honestly, I barely noticed the financial crisis.
Well, you were already sort of living your own mini financial crisis.
That's right.
You're like, finally, everyone's catching up.
It's so true. It's so true. I remember I had after my injury, I was sitting on the couch and a friend came over and I was like, would you explain this financial crisis to me? And I was like, wow, it sounds really bad. Honestly, the financial crisis, I didn't even really realize it until like years later, looking back and using it in teaching law and ethics. Of course, I still teach about it all the time because it's huge. It still has repercussions for lots of people. Anyway, so my daughters and I, my husband was working out of the country, so he's not in the US at the time. So my daughters and I went to the church to see this children's music performance, and we walked in late. No, we didn't walk in late. We walked in and sat on the front row because we were visitors, and they had saved a pew, and they had moved all the pews into the round, sort of in a U shape, so that the children could be in the center of the room. So in sort of a U shape were 3 pews, and we were in, you know, one of these front pews that was reserved for visitors. So we were surrounded by grandparents and people, family visiting. So the show begins, and I have both my girls close beside me. It was so crowded that I scooped my hand into both of their bottoms on both sides to pull them close. And the children are singing, and it was very beautiful. And I remember looking around and just saying, gosh, what a beautiful room. You know, this is so great. I'm so glad we're here. And all of a sudden there was a boom, like a sound of a boom, not a bang, not a pop, but it was a boom. And I looked up because I had the idea that it was a sonic boom, like it was a jet overhead. So I looked up, and then I looked across, and across the room was a woman looking at me, or looking at us, or looking in our direction, and she was screaming. And then I thought, and then I looked to the side, and close to us, I can't say how close, but at the end of the pew was a man with a gun, and he had a look on his face of like a misshapen face. He was screaming. And so I looked around, and people around me were falling out of the pew and falling to the floor. And the strange thing, I think it's a very normal thing in that situation, that someone would not understand what was happening. But oddly, because of my childhood experience with violence, I immediately understood that this is a man with a gun who's killing people, and he's very close, and we must get away. So the next thing I remember, I don't remember how I got out of the pew or anything, but I picked up my children. I was sort of bowling them, sort of pushing them like bowling balls ahead of me and crawling out. And when I got there was an emergency exit, which I didn't ever think was there before I was moving through it. We moved out, and I tried to walk, and I couldn't walk. And so I crawled, and I was telling them to run ahead of me, and they wouldn't. So they're walking beside me while I crawl. And I went around and around the building, and it was just so odd that my instinct was very much kind of, I knew very well how to hide. And I directed them, and we went into some bushes away from the church, and I just started nursing both of them, even though only one of them was still, I started nursing both of them to keep them quiet, because I was thinking this shooter could come out, and I didn't want them to make any noise. So we stayed in these bushes, and, it's chaos all around us, and people are running and screaming. And we eventually were, ambulances came, and I was aware that I didn't realize that I was hurt at all, actually. Or actually, I think I did. I thought I'd been shot. I understood that I couldn't walk. So, but I knew that I knew that I wasn't the worst off. And so I waited until the ambulances had taken away what I thought, or what I guessed were people who needed more help. So then when, like half an hour later or so, when police were walking around calling out to people, is when I called out from the bush, from hiding inside the bush, I'm in here and we're coming out now. So went to the emergency room, and turned out I had broken the patella in half, and I still don't know how that happened. I could speculate, but it doesn't really matter. I had broken the patella cleanly in half and shredded shredded soft tissue around it. And so in the emergency room, chatting, I felt no pain at all. And they did an x-ray, and then they say that, your leg is broken, you need surgery today or tomorrow. And so of course I had the surgery. And the recovery, though, from the surgery was, I ended up having 3 surgeries, and my knee just wouldn't bend. I guess it's apparently standard practice that after this kind of patella repair, that the whole leg has to be immobilized for, I think, 6 weeks or 3 weeks, a certain period of time. And the problem is going to be scar tissue buildup. And when I healed very nicely, but the problem is it just wouldn't bend at all. So my knee was, not straight, but it was stuck like that. And of course, I ended up doing physical therapy for 11 months, and I had 3 different surgeries, and it just wouldn't bend, and was really challenging for the orthopedic surgeon, who just didn't understand why it wasn't bending. And, in physical therapy, I was very cooperative, but I also kind of refused to put myself through maybe the pain that was necessary to force the bending. And I was compliant on the surface, but I think with my physical therapist, there was this kind of resistance I had. And looking back, I think it had to do with there was just so much to process from the whole thing. Like, part of it is, here I am with my two beautiful children in this church hearing a children's music performance. My children that I've nursed and fed homemade food and given everything I can to make them healthy and strong. And then here comes this man and points a gun at us and tries to kill us. I mean, it's the anger is huge, you know. So there's the anger and there's the fear. There's also this kind of irony, or this kind of like, here I am, I had this childhood in Tennessee with this, abusive man abusing my mother, and I grow, and then the depression sort of follows me, but I learn and I grow, and I think that I've moved away from it. And then here I am in this place in Tennessee, actually the church across the street from where I was married, and a safe place, you think. And then this abuser, not the same person, but an abuser, has come to kill people. And later on, I learned the shooter was himself a victim of violence as a child. He'd gone through foster care. He had 5 marriages, and he was abusive, and he was an alcoholic. So, it's just kind of this anger at this person, a little kind of mad at the universe for sending me back into this whirlwind of abusive people. Kind of, so there's a lot of anger about it. And every time I tried to bend and it hurt, kind of took me to this angry, painful place. And I just wanted to, I don't know, it was just so I ended up, strangely, I did not have depression when I was recovering after the shooting. I was angry, it was challenging, but I was in a pretty good state of mind during that. So the thing that I remember, and this happened, as I said, 2008. And at the time, mass shootings, especially in a church, were new. And, I actually, was asked to be on the Today Show or Good Morning America or something. And, nowadays these things happen, and it's just completely, the fact that we are desensitized to it the way we are, and the way that it's kind of, we're worrying about coronavirus, as we should, but gun violence has such a higher number of victims every day. And, so there really is the way we tolerate gun violence is really an unhealthy state of our society. I'm sure we all agree on this. But a reporter asked me, I remember after the shooting, like a few days after, like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. I'm sure this is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And I thought, actually, no, it's not. Because with a mass shooting, the response was immediate support from everyone. Of course. I mean, the perpetrator, nobody supports the perpetrator for the most part with these mass shootings. And it was my experience. The support was overwhelming. I mean, everyone, everywhere was just showering us, me, my 2 daughters, and everyone in the room. There were 200 people in the room. And several people died, and several people were severely injured. And the support from the church, the support, meanwhile, we were visitors in the church and knew no one there. And yet the support was ongoing. It turned out my high school English teacher, who I loved, my high school math teacher, who I loved, were members of this church. So I reconnected with them, started, talking on the phone with them. And the minister of the church is just such a hero. And there are so many heroes. Always in stories of mass shootings, you just can't even believe what people are capable of, the goodness people are capable of. And
I remember being on a list of I wasn't living near you. Unfortunately, since China, I've never gotten to live near you, but I somehow ended up on a list of all your friends. And it was like, not even all your friends, but it was like 100 people who were organizing, who's going to go over and harvest the lemons, who's going to go over and weed the garden, who's going to go over and make a meal. They just like, and that was your Tucson community, right? So you had this Knoxville community who you were reconnecting to and meeting meeting for the first time. And I just remember feeling so gratified that the universe was like rising up to support you and hold you through this, and your whole family.
yes, it was so beautiful. And this is this may sound very strange. I think I can say that after this first surgery I had and was recovering on course, that I was sitting there one day on my couch, and I just felt this euphoria, like this incredible happiness. Part of it is we survived.
Right.
So myself and my children survived. And I don't ever, of course, I pause here and honor the people but we survived, and we were being supported with love all around us. And I can honestly say that within a couple of weeks, I realized I have this experience, horrible though it is so full of love that there's so much good coming out of it already. It's just, so I feel like the everyday, the ordinary struggles of domestic violence are so much worse. And the day in, day out challenges and the lonely shame of depression is really so much worse than something or the gun violence that just happens to the individual. It may or may not be reported in the paper, may or may not be able to go back to work, may or may not survive. That is so much worse. A mass shooting where you get this attention and this validation. Nobody blamed us for it. We were completely innocent victims. And we all rallied together. It was like 200 people in the church against one mentally ill man who was full of anger and rage and grief. And then that community just rippled out, and because of the horror of it, I think friends I had not been in touch with reconnected. I was getting all this attention, all this love. When I got back from the hospital, we pulled in and the yard work had been done. Like Tucson in the rain, when it rains in the summer, the weeds just like go crazy. We pulled in and I was like, am I imagining it, or has someone done the yard? The whole yard was like, and then later I found out a group of people got together and came over and spent a couple hours pulling weeds and beautifying our yard. It's just mind-boggling. And
but I want to say that it didn't come from nowhere. You really do nourish and nurture your relationships in a way that's second to none. You give so much to your friends and to your people, and you draw your circles so widely so that it's not a surprise that you had such a groundswell of support and outpouring of love.
And I really want people watching this to think, I want people to hopefully be inspired, not by me and my greatness, okay, I want people to think, how can I do what's on that poster so that I can, or how can I want that for me. And it's not like it's not like some people deserve love and friendship and some don't. It's like exercising. You need to get up every day and go for a walk or move your body, whatever that's going to be. Okay, walking, or if stretching, and you need to do it. Sometimes you're not in the mood to do it and you have to do it. Building community and nourishing relationships is exactly like that. There's a certain amount of self-discipline in nurturing friendships, and when a friend is having bad times and they're being a total pain in the neck, and you think, it'd be a lot easier for me just not to have that person in my circle right now. I'm not saying you have to be a martyr and deal with things that hurt you. Okay, never. I would never say that. You have to stand up for yourself and don't let abusive people in, okay? If I'm the poster child of anything, it's that. Yeah. But, just approaching friendships with open-heartedness, generosity, but also a certain amount of discipline. Going out and volunteering for things. I can't think of a better, when the shooting happened, I was in a parent cooperative, like painting the structure at the school, babysitting other people's kids, bringing meals to other people when they have a baby or they get cancer. A very good friend of mine was going through cancer at this time. So that meal circle was already in place, and they just added me to the list of drop-off points. Okay, so that's, and one thing I want to say, this is kind of during my recovery, the church had an insurance policy that probably lots of churches have today, but very few churches had back then. And it was a catastrophic endorsement, this is legalese, to their insurance policy. That's like normal insurance policies say, if something crazy happens, like a meteor falls in your church or a crazy person comes in shooting people, the church is not responsible and the insurance policy won't pay. But this church had actually gotten death threats in the past because they took in LGBTQ youth and foster family, children who needed foster. So they had gotten hate attention in the past. And so they had actually bought this insurance policy. Wow. And incredible foresight from the minister. And so when this happened, the church contacted me and said, we have an insurance money for you. So I had Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, but of course that always just pays part. And the whole thing cost, the whole injury kind of start to finish was $20,000. But we didn't really have a lot of money to spare. So that extra insurance policy was very welcome. For example, we had to buy, our one car we shared was a stick shift, and I was not going to drive a stick shift for a very long time with my knee injury. So we got a used car that wasn't automatic. So things like that. So one of the things I did with the money was I joked, but it's true. I was like Southern Arizona stimulus package for alternative healing. I tried everything, and it was, on some level, it's actually fun and interesting because you meet great people. And I don't know what in the end helped the most. I think scientifically, you're supposed to isolate your variables. And I was basically doing everything at the same time every day. I was running all over the place. But I did the usual surgeries. I did physical therapy with a really good sports therapy kind of practice. I did hypnosis. I did acupuncture. I did the usual acupuncture of putting needles in. And then I did like intensive acupuncture where they squirt saline into the scar tissue to release the attachment of the skin to the bone. I did lots of massage therapy, always maybe my favorite of all. I did singing. I joined a singing group. And I did what I love, which is lots and lots and lots and lots of novels and movies and food. I also took Vicodin around the time of the surgeries, and I found that when the Vicodin was great when I was taking it. It has a real anti-anxiety benefit, which I realized only when I went off the Vicodin cold turkey and had all of the anxiety come roaring back into my dreams. So then I had to really face that. This was before we talked about the opioid addiction, right? So I was never on Vicodin for more than 2 weeks, but yikes, very addictive and very glad to stop that stuff. So, and then just, friendships, people actually would just drop by the house in the afternoon and talk to me. We should all be doing a lot more of that, that was great. So the whole thing, and then of course my experience was my experience. My older daughter had a different experience because she was starting first grade. My younger daughter had a different experience because at that point for a child in preschool, she didn't understand the difference between real and make-believe. So she just believed it was all terrible make-believe. And then my husband, who was out of the country when all of this happened, he had, this kind of, a kind of a guilt of, I wasn't there to protect you. I'm so glad he wasn't there. No one could have protected anyone when someone has a semi-automatic gun. Okay. But, and then he just became a total prince, a total hero. He just did everything, listened, no judgment. He was just there, present, going forward through the healing without entering into my very typical after trauma. You relive every minute. You have to talk about every single minute over and over and over and over, this obsession. And he just would listen to it endlessly. Just endlessly listen to it. Never said, it's time to move on. So having a great partner is maybe.
Yeah. And for people who don't have that, a great someone, it could
be anyone.
And sometimes it takes, if that doesn't come flowing naturally from your partner or from your best friend, I think it's fair game to ask for those behaviors, because a lot of times people who love us, they want to do what we need, but it's not always clear to them what we need. So it's beautiful that he was able to sort of intuitively just know how to hold space and bear witness and just unconditionally love you as you worked your healing process. But if people don't have that, make a list of the behaviors you want to see and give it to your best friends, because they'll be grateful for the guidance.
Yes. And it's so much pressure on that one, if you have a partner or a best friend or a roommate or a mom or a dad or even a therapist. It's too much pressure for one person. One person can't do all this for anybody. And that's why I think you open the circle, widen the circle. Support groups. I love support groups. Whether they're face-to-face or online or whatever. Nowadays, you can do that online. Back then, I don't think it existed. But so all of this was, 12 years ago. I guess 11 and a half years ago. And it's, it took me years to recover, really. And now I have, pretty much 95% recovery in my knee. And because the way the mechanics work, I have foot problems and hip problems now. But, I use an adaptive shoe that has a big fat sole that is not bendy. And so I can just roll, it's called a Hoka. And it's a great shoe for plantar fasciitis as well as arthritis. So I have quite a bit of arthritis in that foot because my gait changed and it put too much pressure on the bones and didn't flow like it was supposed to. But it's okay. I walk all the time. I swim. I ride my bike. I dance. Not as much. I do yoga. And I'm 53, so I'm just grateful that I can, do what I do. And so I feel just super connected to the world. And, I've got a daughter going off to college in the fall. And so I'm just so happy I'm still on the earth. That's a real, two things I'll say. One is, of all the things I did and all the things people did for me for healing, and they were all part of the mix. I read a friend of mine who's from India. She's a doctor, but Western medicine ER doctor, but she started practicing medicine in India like age 18, because that's how it works, I guess. And she also does a lot of Ayurvedic kind of Indian medicine. She gave me a little book, and I'm a big reader. So she gave me this book, and then I read it like it was a real message for me. And I'm spacing right now on the name of this person. And the funniest thing, I called her and told her, this is so helpful. And she had never read the book and didn't even remember what I was talking about. See how things just get passed along. So this was this message. So it was the story of this man. I'm spacing on his name, and he grew up in Lebanon, and he was in a Christian family, and everything was great. And then the big war came, and Muslims versus Christian. And one day a bomb landed on his building, and he woke up in the rubble. And it was a war zone, and somebody rescued him, and he ended up hiding out with this other family. And they took care of each other. And, a week or two goes by, and then he realizes it's a Muslim family. This is Muslims versus Christians. He doesn't know where his family is. And here's a Muslim family who is treating him as one of their own. So the war continues. He survives. He ends up in America and goes to medical school and becomes a psychiatrist. And it's all very hard work. And one day, he begins actually working as a psychiatrist, and things slow down a tiny bit in his life. And after all of this busyness, he starts having severe, debilitating panic attacks, because it's the first time he's had time to fully process the trauma. But he doesn't really know what it is, even though he's a psychiatrist. So he develops a system to heal himself. And it's all about engaging the psoas muscle and engaging your core stomach, and engaging it kind of as much as you can until it just is so exhausted it releases. And it's part of a whole system. It's part of a whole treatment of trauma. Mm-hmm. And the little story that he told, which I carry this around all the time, or it's like, I guess it's a mantra or a little one sentence. But just envision yourself as for me, a rabbit. And the rabbit is munching on some grass, and then a fox comes and tries to attack the rabbit, and the rabbit runs as fast as the rabbit can run, using all its tools, changing direction and leaping and whatever. And then the rabbit is lucky, and the rabbit escapes from the fox. And now the rabbit is alone and sitting in the grass and shaking. And then at some point, the rabbit is done shaking, and it eats some grass, eats some more grass, drinks some water, and continues on with its life. It doesn't stay there mad at the fox or worried about the fox forever. At some point, the rabbit continues on. And so this author is saying that, trauma is actually normal part of life. Every creature experiences trauma. Humans, animals, birds, we all experience illness, injury, trauma. And if you think it shouldn't happen to you, then actually that's ego. It happens to all of us. And it just, some more than others, some sooner than others, rich or poor, it's actually part of life. And it's sort of normal. So let's get on with the business, the everyday business of healing, helping each other, and recovering, trying to avoid drama, trying not to, just the everyday business of healing and building support systems and keeping ourselves strong and each other strong.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a real mind, a structure for me, or a way of thinking.
Yeah. Well, you have given us so much to think about. I really appreciate this. Is there anything else that you want to say to this community of seekers of knowledge and seekers of solutions and seekers of solace? What would you say to them?
Well, I'm thinking immediately back to your story of the people who say, well, we have to go outside in the sun, and we have to dance, and we have to sing, and we have to be together. So anything that brings you joy, ideally not drugs or alcohol, okay, because those bring problems potentially. But anything, people who bring you joy, being in the presence of someone who brings you joy, and it's simple, free things, whatever these things are, drawing, singing, dancing, these free, non-addictive things. Write a list of these things. Every time you feel that little spark of joy, that little bird singing, and move toward that and try to do more of that, and discipline, schedule it into your day, these things that make you happy, and make that list as long as you can make it. You don't have to apologize. I think, you don't have to feel like you don't deserve it, and don't do expensive things, free things, whatever they are. And try to circle up with people who share those joys, because that's easier to have the schedule and the discipline to go out and do them if you've got someone who's going to pick you up and give you a ride and carpool, and then just try to create a fabric like that.
Share the things that bring your spark back so that others can be reminded of those free and beautiful options.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Allison. I always appreciate having time with you. And again, I'm so grateful that you were willing to spend time with this audience. So thank you.
Of course. I am happy to share and happy to see you and talk to you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.